The door slams in the corridor at 84 Avenue Foch in Paris, and the footsteps stop outside her cell. For weeks now, the same pattern has repeated. The Gestapo officer with the questions, the guard with the keys, the table, the light in her eyes. Tonight is different. Tonight they have her codes, her radio set, and the names of people she once trusted. They offer her a simple bargain. Talk, and the pain stops. Refuse, and she will disappear into a prison cell in Germany where nobody will ever find her. Noor Inayat Khan looks at them, remembers the wireless operators already dead, and makes a decision that will kill her. She will not say a single word that can harm another person. We begin long before Avenue Foch, in a house in Paris where there are no uniforms and no guns. Now we go back to Noor's childhood to understand how a gentle girl ends up as the first female wireless operator dropped into occupied France. Noor-un-Nisa Inayat Khan was born on the first day of 1914 in Moscow, to an Indian father and an American mother. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a Sufi musician and spiritual teacher descended from Tipu Sultan of Mysore. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, was from New Mexico. The family moved to London when Noor was a baby, and then to France in 1920 when her father founded a Sufi community at Suresnes, just outside Paris. Noor grew up between worlds. At home she heard Indian ragas and Sufi stories, and at school she read French poetry and English fairy tales. As a young woman she studied child psychology at the Sorbonne and wrote stories for French children's radio and for a book of tales called 20 Jataka Tales. The people who knew her then described her as shy, dreamy, and utterly nonviolent. When she spoke about nonviolence, she meant it in a deep way. She told friends she could never imagine harming another living being. That is the person Britain will later train to carry explosives, a radio set, and the fate of an entire resistance network on her back. Encyclopedia Feury. In 1940, Noor's world cracked. The German army overran France. The family fled back to England on one of the last ships. Noor, her mother, and her siblings found a small flat at 4 Taviton Street in Bloomsbury, London. From the window she could see blackout curtains and barrage balloons. She told friends that when she saw how refugees were treated and what occupation did to ordinary people in France, she decided she had to fight, even if it went against her upbringing. We are now in London, under the Blitz. Now we see how a young woman who believed in nonviolence volunteers for one of the most dangerous jobs of the war. Noor joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force in November 1940 as an aircraft woman second class. Her initial role was as a wireless operator and then as a radio mechanic. She showed a talent for Morse, patience for long hours with headphones on, and a calm under stress that her instructors noticed. Somewhere inside Whitehall her name was flagged. A woman who spoke fluent French and English, already trained on radios and with a French upbringing, was exactly the profile the Special Operations Executive's F section needed. The SOE had been created to set Europe ablaze by sending small teams into occupied countries to sabotage, gather intelligence, and support resistance movements. By 1943, their male wireless operators in France were being hunted down one by the German security services. The work was so dangerous that the expected life of a wireless operator in France was measured in weeks. Noor was interviewed by F section and accepted. She was given the code name Madeleine. On her paperwork, she became Nora Baker, and later would also use the alias Jeanne-Marie Renier, a children's nurse. Training was hard. She learned clandestine tradecraft, resistance work, and parachute training. Instructors noted that she was not a natural at self-defense or weapons. She preferred the radio and the codebook. One report said she was not overburdened with brains and too emotional, but also that she was completely loyal. Some in SOE headquarters later argued she should never have been sent. That small bureaucratic argument will hang over her story like a shadow. In the end, her radio skills outweighed the doubts. By early 1943, the Prosper network in Paris, one of F section's largest circuits, needed a replacement wireless operator. Noor was told that if she accepted, her chances of survival were slim. She accepted anyway. She wrote to a friend that she wanted to do something for the suffering of France, the country that had been her home. We move forward now to the summer of 1943. We leave the training grounds of England and drop into the rooftops of occupied France. On the night of June 16th to 17th, 1943, Noor was flown to France by a Royal Air Force bomber and parachuted into a field near Angers. She landed safely, buried her parachute, and was taken into Paris to join the Prosper network. Her cover was as a nanny, Jeanne-Marie Renier, with false papers showing her as a children's nurse. To her contacts, she was Madeleine. To London, she was the last link of a chain that was already beginning to snap. The Prosper circuit, run by Francis Soutel, had been one of the biggest SOE networks in France. It coordinated arms drops, sabotage, and liaison across the Paris region. But by the time Noor arrived, Prosper had already been penetrated by the Sicherheitsdienst and the Gestapo. Arrests had started, safe houses were blown, courier lines were watched. In late June, Noor transmitted a chilling message back to London. Soutel and other key figures had disappeared, believed arrested. She knew she was stepping into a broken circuit. Maurice Buckmaster, head of F section, offered to bring her home on the next aircraft. She refused. She believed she was now the only wireless operator still active in Paris. Without her, there would be no way for scattered resistance groups to talk to London. She agreed to a compromise. She would keep receiving, but would transmit only when absolutely necessary to reduce the risk of detection. For the next 4 months, Noor stayed in the city that was hunting her. She changed addresses frequently, carried her heavy suitcase radio from one attic to another, and sent a stream of coded messages to London about arrests, arms requests, and possible landing grounds. The German direction-finding teams were getting better. They could triangulate a signal in 20 to 30 minutes if an operator stayed on the air too long. She kept her transmissions to the shortest possible bursts. Little is known in detail about those months. That lack of detail is itself part of the story. Noor could not keep a diary. Most of the colleagues who knew her in Paris were dead within the year. What we do know is that she survived multiple close calls, including at least one near capture when she arrived at a letterbox address SOE had mistakenly passed her that was already compromised. One of the German officers who later interrogated her said that by late summer, hunting Madeleine had become a high priority. We are still in Paris, but now it is October 1943. The net has been drawing tight around Noor for months. Now we go to the night it closes. On or about October 13th, Noor was betrayed. The most likely betrayer was a French woman, Renée Gary, the sister of Noor's local organizer, who seems to have informed the Germans in exchange for money. Another possibility is that an earlier arrested agent broke under torture and gave up details of her address. Either way, the result was the same. Gestapo and Sicherheitsdienst officers burst into her apartment. They found Noor's wireless set, her codes, and her carefully kept notebooks with past messages. She fought. Witnesses later testified that she scratched and bit an officer so hard he kept the scars for life. She was taken to SD headquarters at 84 Avenue Foch, the elegant building in the rich west of Paris that had become a center of terror. For about a month, Noor was interrogated at Avenue Foch. The officer in charge was likely Ernst Vogt under Hans Kiefer, the head of the SD in Paris. They had her codes. They had her radio. They had notes of transmissions. They wanted names, locations of safe houses, and confirmation of identities. Kiefer testified after the war that Noor refused to give them anything. She lied, he said consistently. She tried to escape. Twice. In one attempt, she climbed onto a roof. In another, she managed to pry open a window and reach a courtyard before being caught. Each attempt resulted in harsher treatment. Each escape attempt also told the Germans something they did not want to admit. This slight, quiet woman was not going to resign herself peacefully to their control. Meanwhile, the Germans used her radio. They sent bogus messages to London posing as Madeleine, luring in other agents and arranging arms drops they could capture. This was the so-called Funkspiel, the radio game. The notes they seized in her apartment helped them decipher some of her codes and roll up more of the already wounded Prosper network. We leave Paris now and cross the border into Germany. Noor has been classified as highly dangerous and too unpredictable to keep in Paris. Now we are taken with her to a prison cell that will hold her in chains for 10 months. In November 1943, Noor was transported to Pforzheim prison in southwest Germany. There she was registered under a false name, Nora Baker, and placed in what the Germans called Sonderhaft, special custody. Her cell was small, bare, and isolated. She was kept in solitary confinement, forbidden any contact with other prisoners. Her hands and feet were shackled for most of the day. Guards described her as extremely dangerous and noted in the prison records that she was not to be allowed out without chains. Over the next 10 months, the Karlsruhe Gestapo came repeatedly to interrogate her. We do not have transcripts of those interrogations. What we have are fragments. The prison director testified after the war that Noor refused to give any information whatsoever, either about her work or her colleagues when she was interrogated by the Karlsruhe Gestapo. Hans Kiefer said she did not betray a single name. An SD officer recalled that she never even told them her real identity. She was beaten. She was deprived of food. Her chains chafed her wrists and ankles raw. At least one source says she was described in Pforzheim as completely uncooperative. In this channel, we often talk about prisoner routines, roll calls, work details, scraps of food. In Pforzheim, Noor's routine was deprivation. She remained alone, day after day, in a cell barely larger than her body. The only breaks were interrogation sessions that were themselves just another form of punishment. In that isolation, the only thing that stayed constant was her decision not to talk. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. As we go back to Noor in her chains, remember that for 10 months no one on the outside knew exactly where she was or what was being done to her. Before we follow Noor to her final transfer, we need to stop and pull back for a moment. We are still in 1944 Europe, but we zoom out from one cell to see the scale of the system she was up against. Between 1941 and 1944, the Special Operations Executive sent around 470 agents into France. Of these, roughly 104 were women. Around a quarter of all SOE agents in France were captured and killed. Among the female agents alone, figures vary, but at least 16 were executed or died in concentration camps. Wireless operators like Noor were in the worst statistical category. They had to carry bulky radio sets, had to transmit from fixed locations for several minutes at a time, and their Morse fist could be recognized. German radio detection teams improved their technology throughout 1943, reducing the time they needed to triangulate a signal. Some estimates put the average survival time of a wireless operator in occupied France at 6 weeks. Noor lasted almost 4 months in Paris before arrest, and then another 11 months under German control, without betraying names that could be used to break other circuits. Wikipedia Sawan. At Pforzheim, she was one of thousands of Nacht- und Nebel prisoners, people the Nazi system intended to disappear without trail. Chains, solitary confinement, and beatings were standard for those classified as highly dangerous political prisoners. To the guards, she was just a number in a book. To London, she had already effectively vanished. The war was moving on. D-Day in June 1944 opened a new front in France. Noor stayed in her cell in Germany, the battle that mattered for her now taking place entirely inside her own refusal to speak. We are now in September 1944. The Allies have landed in Normandy. Paris has been liberated, but not everyone has been freed. Now we follow Noor on one last train journey. On September 11th or 12th, 1944, prison records show that Noor and 3 other female SOE agents were taken from Pforzheim and put on a transport toward Bavaria. The other women were Yolande Beekman, Madeleine Dammerment, and Eliane Plumen. They traveled 250 miles in a prison van and then by rail to Dachau concentration camp near Munich. Dachau was one of the earliest Nazi camps, opened in 1933, and had become a destination for political prisoners from across occupied Europe. By late 1944, it was overcrowded, disease-ridden, and increasingly used as a killing ground for small groups the regime wanted to eliminate quietly. History Extra Part 4. Witnesses later testified at war crimes trials that Noor was singled out on arrival. A Dutch prisoner recalled that she had been badly beaten and was a bloody mess when guards dragged her out of her cell on the morning of September 13, 1944. Some accounts say she was tortured through the night before execution. The 4 women were taken to a wall near the crematorium, forced to kneel, and shot in the head from behind. Noor was 30 years old. One prisoner later said that her last word, shouted as loud as she could manage in her broken state, was "Liberté," freedom. Whether that single word was exactly as reported or has been polished by memory, it fits with everything else we know. She had refused for 11 months to give the Nazis what they wanted, and even at the end she chose a word that pointed away from herself. Jan Overton Fuller Plough 4. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. Now we go from the crematorium at Dachau back to London and Paris to see what was done with the pieces of her story that survived. We are now after the war, in 1945 and the late 1940s. The camps are being liberated. Documents are being collected. Families are asking where their daughters and sons went. Noor's fate was not clear immediately. For some time, British authorities believed she might have been taken to Natzweiler concentration camp in Alsace and killed there. Only in 1947, after war crimes investigations and testimonies from Dachau prisoners, did it become clear that she had been executed at Dachau on September 13, 1944. Even with that clarified, much of the detail of her captivity remains fragmentary. We have statements from Kiefer, from the Pforzheim prison governor, and from a handful of fellow prisoners who glimpsed her being moved or heard about her treatment secondhand. They agree on the core points. She was always in chains. She was frequently beaten. She refused to cooperate. She never gave her real name or any usable information. The Germans were able to use her captured codes and radio set to send some deceptive messages to London. But those came from their own cryptanalysts, not from her collaboration. In 1946, France awarded Noor the Croix de Guerre with Gold Star for her service. In 1949, the United Kingdom awarded her the George Cross, the highest civilian decoration for bravery, given for acts of the greatest heroism or of the most conspicuous courage in circumstances of extreme danger. The official citation summarized what witnesses had pieced together, that over a period of more than 12 months, from her arrival in France to her execution, she displayed courage both moral and physical of the highest order. Org. Per 3. In 2012, a bronze statue of Noor was unveiled in Gordon Square Gardens in London, not far from the Bloomsbury house where she had lived before going to war. English Heritage placed a blue plaque at 4 Taviton Street to mark the site. In Suresnes, the Sufi community her father had founded holds commemorations. In India and among South Asian diaspora groups in Britain, she is remembered as a rare figure, a woman of Indian Muslim heritage honored at the highest levels for fighting fascism in Europe. We end where we began, with the question in the title. We are no longer in a specific cell or city. We are in the space between what she could have done and what she chose to do. The Gestapo and Sicherheitsdienst wanted from Noor what they wanted from every captured wireless operator: names of contacts, locations of safe houses, recognition of photos, and clarification of who in her network could still be trusted. With the notebook seized in Paris, they already had clues. One word from her could have confirmed which code names matched real people. One cooperation session could have set up dozens of arrests. Instead, every source we have says the same thing: Hans Kiefer. She did not give a single piece of information, but lied consistently. The director of Pforzheim. She refused to give any information whatsoever about work or colleagues. English Heritage's review of the war crimes evidence. Despite beatings, she refused to cooperate. Encyclopedia entries. She never broke, never identified herself, never collaborated in the radio game. That is what "never revealed a single secret" means here. It does not mean the Germans got nothing useful at all. They had her equipment and previous traffic. It means Noor herself never became a source. For a prisoner of war, especially a clandestine one, that is the line everything turns on. Once captured, you cannot undo the fact that your gear and papers are in enemy hands. The one thing still under your control is what comes out of your mouth. Noor chose silence and misdirection, even knowing that doing so meant months of chains, beatings, and finally, a bullet at a concentration camp wall. Her story is not about spectacular explosions or daring escapes that succeed. Her escape attempts failed. Her network collapsed around her. She never saw liberation. Instead, her story fits the heart of this channel. One person inside a prison system, deciding that their own pain is a price they are willing to pay to protect others. In that sense, Noor Inayat Khan belongs alongside every prisoner of war and resistance fighter who decided that the last thing the enemy would get from them would be nothing at all.